Okay, let's do it. Let's do the Twilight video. Twilight isn't that bad. I mean, it still is really, really, really bad. But, I get it now. In that it was, not written for me. In that, I was technically the right age when Twilight came out in 2005. And it was not meant for high school girls. Only by proxy. It was actually meant for Stephenie Meyers, a 30-something married woman with children who wanted to relive her glory days in high school. And now that I am a 30-something married woman with children, oh, I get it. I really get it, actually. So let me explain. So there's a lot of interesting things about Twilight. Why did it blow up? What was going on with it? And I can't say, okay, it wasn't meant for teenagers at all, because when I was in high school, everybody was reading Twilight. Even I read, like, a good chunk of it. I basically got to the scene in Port Angeles where, right before she confronts Edward about being a vampire. And, I put the book down for some reason at that point, I think to go eat dinner or something, and I never picked the book back up again. I just, so disinterested. And it was bad, and everything you would hear about it was bad, and it's all true, like the sparkly vampires, the whatever. Although a lot of, I think, our perception of that sort of thing was more to do with the movies than the book itself. Though the sparkly vampire scene in the book was, so apparently it was how it all began. It's very telling, and it's probably the worst part of the book. So essentially the story behind this, whether it's true or not, I'm going to lean towards it sounds more like it was true, is that Stephenie Meyers had a dream about sparkly vampires and wrote that chapter. And then wrote the rest of the book, and then went back and filled in the beginning bits. And weirdly enough, the beginning bits are the best part of the book. The rest of the book kind of sucks. Everything from sparkly vampire onward. And the reason for that is that the first part of the book captures something that I think a lot of people wish they could capture and don't do, which is first love and crushing on someone and feeling this way about a boy for the first time and the overwhelming emotions that you have. So even though Bella has no character to speak of, and Edward has no character to speak of, that butterflies. Stephenie Meyers captured the butterflies. And so when you read Twilight, especially if you're older and you read it, you just get this wave of nostalgia, is how I would describe it. I mean, first of all, this was my high school experience. I mean, Twilight came out while I was in high school, and I'm reading about Bella in high school, and I just have this overwhelming nostalgia for my high school years from reading this. Mind you, I hated high school, so like, yeah. It's one of those like, oh my god, I'm feeling nostalgia for something I really, really despised. Good job. Like, kudos. I have to hand it to you. And then it also, gives me the nostalgia for first love, for that feeling of being in love. For the first time, and then when being in love with who I eventually married and all that crap. And then, strangely enough, there was one other thing that it gave me nostalgia for, which is that we moved to the Pacific Northwest 5 years ago, at the height of things, yeah. And reading it and then subsequently watching the movie, I did have this wave of nostalgia for that first year of living in this area, because weirdly enough, even though she has never been to the Pacific Northwest before she wrote the books, Stephanie Meyers did kind of capture something about it, but maybe just capturing the newness of moving and new beginnings and things like that. But then the movies obviously visually capture the Pacific Northwest. And yeah, and even though that first year was actually very hard, because it was that time period, people, it's making me nostalgia for that too. And that to me is, I think, the core of what made Twilight popular. So I do think it did capture teenage girls, mainly because actually it doesn't have sex. I think it perfectly captures the tension of being with someone and wanting someone without, and give you some catharsis, so like they do kiss and stuff, but without getting gratuitous. And I think that's usually the downfall of romance novels, is that when you finally get to the sex scenes, you're kind of like, oh well, oh, what am I still doing here? Like you get post-nut clarity essentially, and Twilight doesn't have that. Like I even so I read the first book and then I skipped to the fourth book to be like, was there actually a sex scene? No, and in fact what was written on the page was a little disturbing in terms of relationship stuff, but I will do a video on relationships in literature later. That's not this one. This one is more, what is the value of Twilight, essentially. And then, so I think that's why teenage girls liked it. I think it was safe, but still tantalizing. It just, because it captured that feeling that most of us as teenage girls hadn't felt yet and wanted to feel, and it didn't go into uncomfortable places which we weren't quite ready for as teenage girls, I do think it just perfectly captures that. And then the other thing about Bella, as like awful and wooden as a character she is, especially when you consider Kristen Stewart's portrayal of her, she is kind of this like more mature teenager. And most girls, when they're projecting themselves onto this, want to feel that. They want to be told they're, a little bit special and smart and more mature than their classmates, but they're still, a teenager, right? Kind of that contradiction I think most girls go through in their teenage years, which is I want to be older, but I'm not really ready to be older. And that's what Bella does perfectly portray at the end of the day. And so yeah, that's not a character, obviously, but the point of Bella is that you project onto her, and you can, and what she does have character-wise makes you feel better as a teenage girl. And then the other side of it, where I think most of the money probably came from, was the wine moms and the 30-somethings and all those older women who put themselves in Bella's shoes because they wanted that nostalgia of being young and in love for the first time. Especially when you consider your, daily grind at 30 whatever and 40 whatever, and, they would watch their teenage daughters read this, and they wanted to experience it again vicariously. And that's what it is. It is Stephanie Meyers' nostalgia bait. Like, she put something onto the page that I think a lot of women can relate to, especially older women, and older women overwhelmingly really got into the series. And it makes sense as to why. Like, it was objectively not a good story. I was cringing at the ending, and I had to skip around a lot because, oh my god, it was terrible. But those first couple chapters before the Sparkly Vampire was just like, oh, I get it. And I want to go back and relive some of that with this like rose-colored glasses tint on. And that, I think, is what the value of Twilight is, as awful as of a book as it is. Now, that's not to say it's still not good. It's obviously not good. I don't even know if that's valuable in of itself. I do think nostalgia baiting is one of the most dangerous things people can do in media and literature. But yet at the same time, a lot of consumers do seek it out, and so it's hard to. I don't know, right? But I wish Twilight didn't exist, as a lot of people do. Kind of, because I do think Twilight is why we have the crap we have today. In that, so I'm going to get into my Mormon conspiracy here. And mind you, I'm just going to lay out facts, because I don't actually have like a concrete theory as to what was going on, but there's just a bunch of things that you start to notice. So, interestingly enough, in 2005, 2 authors got their start. One was male, one was female. Both were in their early 30s. Both wrote fantasy stories. Both were given ridiculous contracts, like publishing deals, for untested authors up until that point. And both were Mormon. Now, one blew up like crazy at the time. The other blew up later, or had a gradual success. Now, he did succeed very early on still, but not the way Stephanie Meyers did. So one, obviously Stephanie Meyers with Twilight, Mormon author. The other was Brandon Sanderson. And my theory is that there's an interesting thing with the Mormons that you'll notice, is that they do kind of get their hooks into things, and fairly successfully too. So a lot of like the mommy influencer channels, especially the ones out of Utah, are all Mormon women. There are so many TLC shows about Mormons, like Sister Wives, and I think The Secret Lives of Mormons, whatever it is. Like, Mormons are everywhere in the media. And for a while there, they were really prominent in the publishing world too. Now, as of late, they haven't been as prominent. So, I don't know what's going on, but like, you would have like Stephanie Meyers, and she was so careful not to put smut into her stories. But then you would start to see Mormons put more and more smut into their books. And there was a whole joke of like, oh, it's another Mormon writer, right? And so, I don't know what's going on. I want to assume something akin to Scientology, if you know what goes on in Scientology in Hollywood. But I can't say for sure. Just all I know is that something about it, there was a huge push to push these authors forward. And at the end of the day, Brandon Sanderson is actually a very good author. Most of his issues come down to the fact that he puts too much Mormonism in his books, and I really wish someone would get him a good editor. Like, he needs some hardcore editing, which I know he's getting some, but he needs someone to tell him no sometimes. But it's interesting because I think at the moment Brandon Sanderson might be the last decent traditional author out there on the market, certainly in the fantasy field. I mean, he's the only one not writing smut, and he's one of the only male authors left that still gets publishing deals. So I don't know, maybe I'll do a video on Brandon Sanderson, but for now I'm leaving it there. It's just more interesting to me that they both came out at the same time. Stephanie Meyers and Brandon Sanderson both had unmitigated success within their type, and both, I mean, it both really came out of nowhere, and that's the curious thing of like, what is this? Especially with Stephanie Myers, because she got a $750,000 book deal for Twilight, and for something that like they had no way of knowing was going to be as big as it was. So I can only assume some sort of shenanigans on someone's part, but nevertheless it worked, and Brandon Sanderson also worked. So my best guess, if I'm being kind about it, is that they didn't just choose anyone if they were pushing something, some agenda. They did push two authors who had something to offer. As weird as that may be to say about Stephanie Myers. But I can't necessarily be totally mad at her. I am just mad at the book industry, because the problem is you push these two authors. You pushed male and you pushed female. And this was right around the time Harry Potter was wrapping up, right? So this was definitely trying to figure out how to continue with the audience that they had garnered with Harry Potter, which is boy and girl. And this is where the real conspiracy comes in, honestly. And so they pushed a male and they pushed a female, and overwhelmingly the female side won. The female sold more books off the bat. The female was just everywhere. Twilight was everywhere. And you can kind of see the pivot at that point. So they didn't drop Brandon Sanderson, obviously, but suddenly all we see is fiction and literature targeting women. And then with the sales of 50 Shades of Grey, with the smut, it suddenly, you have to also add smut to these books too. And then you saw the degradation of it. Yeah, it's just this fact that they're just catering to the female audience, and then they started catering to the smut-loving, porn-addicted audience, and down this spiral we slide until we get to today, where who are they catering to anymore? And so while I think Twilight still has its place, it really did herald in an era of issues. And I don't know, I don't want to say don't publish Twilight, but they really took the wrong lesson from it.